On Father's Day, I received a package from my daughter, a surprise, or so I thought. But when I brought it inside, my wife stared at it, went pale, and whispered, "Don't open it." "Can't you see?" That's when I noticed them, tiny holes along the side. For breathing. A soft rustling came from inside. Something was alive in there. I stepped back. My wife froze. 10 minutes later, the police were at our door. What happened next revealed a level of betrayal I never thought possible. Not just from my daughter, but from the man she married. This isn't just a story about a strange package. It's about manipulation, entitlement, and the moment I realized I had to choose between protecting my family's peace or staying silent forever. Before we begin, if you love stories about justice, betrayal, and unexpected consequences, like this video, subscribe for more. Comment where you're listening from. We read everyone. It was Father's Day. And for the first time in years, David felt a small flicker of peace as he sat on the porch with his coffee. The sun was gentle, the breeze light, and the world outside Maple Grove felt distant, almost irrelevant. His wife Linda moved about in the kitchen, preparing breakfast, the familiar clinking of dishes and the soft hum of the radio forming a soundtrack to their quiet morning. The kind of peace only a man who had worked 43 years in aerospace engineering, raised a daughter through her teen years, and weathered every storm a family could face, might finally earn. At 8:42 a.m., that peace was interrupted by the deep rumble of a delivery truck. David glanced up from the local paper to see a brown delivery van slowing in front of their house. That was odd. They weren't expecting anything, and Sunday deliveries were uncommon unless someone had paid extra. The driver hopped out, checked his device, and approached the porch with a medium-sized package in hand. "David Walker?" the man asked. David nodded and signed, taking the box. It felt lighter than expected, almost hollow, yet the cardboard felt dense. As the truck pulled away, Linda stepped outside, drying her hands on a towel. "Who would send you something on a Sunday?" she asked. David turned the box over in his hands. "No idea." "There's no return address." Linda's brow furrowed as she leaned in to examine it. Then she paused, hand hovering over the top. Her face drained of color. "David, don't open it," he chuckled. "Why not?" She pointed. "Can't you see those holes? They're for breathing." David froze. Now that she mentioned it, he noticed the tiny uniform punctures on the sides, something intentionally done. And then faintly the sound. A soft rustling from within. Something alive was inside. The couple stood still, the warm suburban morning now cloaked in unease. David slowly placed the box on the coffee table inside, retreating a few steps. Linda's hand clutched his arm. Another sound came, a longer, almost dragging shuffle, followed by a low, drawn-out hiss. They both recoiled. David pulled out his phone and dialed. His hands were steady, but his pulse was not. "Yes, I need to report a suspicious package. It was just delivered. Something's moving inside." "Yes, we're in Maple Grove. Police said they would arrive within 10 minutes. 10 minutes that felt like 10 hours. As they waited, David's thoughts drifted backward. Just 6 days earlier, Rachel had come by with her husband Mike. What began as a casual conversation spiraled into yet another confrontation about money. Rachel had demanded early access to her inheritance. Mike had stood nearby with crossed arms and smug eyes. David had refused. Again, he had given enough. Paid for Rachel's college, her wedding, bailed her out of credit card debt 3 separate times, covered rent, and even paid off Mike's truck when they were between jobs. Now they were demanding more, saying it was selfish to hold on to money while they were drowning. David had stood his ground. Linda tried to mediate, but Rachel's words turned venomous. She claimed he was choosing money over family, that he didn't love his grandchildren if he wouldn't help. That night ended with slammed doors, shattered ceramic, and threats he hadn't taken seriously. Until now, he stared at the box. Could they have sent this? Would Rachel do something so twisted? Another hiss came. Longer, louder. The doorbell rang. 2 officers arrived, both young but composed. David and Linda explained everything. The box was examined but left untouched. "We're calling animal control," Officer Mason said. "Something's in there, and we don't want to take chances." David handed over the box and watched it disappear into the back of a white van, secured in a container. The officer asked if they had any enemies. David hesitated. Linda looked away. They both thought of Rachel. He didn't say it. But it hung in the air. Back inside, Linda sat in silence, David paced. Then his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Hope the kids enjoy Father's Day. Just remember who you chose to hurt. No signature. But he knew. He showed Linda. Her lips trembled. David walked to his office. He opened a drawer filled with documents. Bank records, credit card statements, old checks made out to Rachel. Evidence of years of enabling. He stared at a folder marked estate plan. The snake, or whatever was in that box, was the final warning. He opened his laptop and began typing. David sat at his desk, staring at the glowing laptop screen. The cursor blinked like a silent metronome, urging him to act. Outside, the sun had shifted higher, casting long shadows through the blinds across the legal documents he had just opened. The file labeled estate plan had not been touched in over 2 years. But today, it felt like the only tool he had left. The events of the morning still played on a loop in his mind. The rustling from the package, Linda's trembling voice, the low hissing sound that had made his blood run cold. He had never imagined he would need to call the police on Father's Day. Never imagined something so simple, a box, could carry such weight, such threat, such cruelty. But the message that followed had removed all doubt. Rachel had sent it. His daughter. He scanned the familiar terms in the estate document. Trusts, contingencies, educational allowances. It had been designed to protect her, to ensure her future long after he was gone. But now, he wasn't sure she deserved it. She had used his grandchildren, Ethan and Chloe, as emotional bait in the past. But this was something new. Something meaner, calculated. Linda walked in, her footsteps soft, but her face drawn. She said nothing, only placed a mug of tea beside him. Her silence was more eloquent than any words. She understood what he was considering. She had seen enough to know that something in their family had broken beyond repair. David opened the financial account portal. His hands, steady from decades of engineering work, began dismantling what he had once built for Rachel's benefit. He removed her as an authorized user from 2 credit cards, canceled the automatic transfers to her checking account, changed the passwords she likely knew by memory. Then he drafted an email to Margaret, the family's estate attorney, requesting an urgent meeting. Each keystroke felt like a closing door. By noon, the weight of it began to settle. The immediate danger was gone. Animal control had confirmed the snake was non-venomous, but the psychological damage lingered. A snake, on Father's Day. The symbolism wasn't lost on David. It wasn't about the creature inside. It was about fear, about sending a message. He stepped outside, needing air. The neighborhood was peaceful again. Kids rode bikes in cul-de-sacs. Sprinklers hissed across green lawns, the kind of normalcy he used to take for granted. He watched the Hendersons pack up their SUV for what looked like a beach day. They waved. He waved back, managing a small smile. But beneath it, his chest felt heavy. Back inside, Linda had turned on the news, though the volume was low. She wasn't really watching, just filling the silence. They had barely spoken since the text message. David knew she was waiting for him to say something definitive, to confirm that this wasn't just another outburst from Rachel. That this time it was different. It was. He sat down beside her and reached for the folder again. A photo slipped out, a picture of Rachel as a teenager, arms around David's neck at a science fair. She was beaming, proud, full of potential. That girl was gone now, replaced by a woman who had spent the last decade demanding more than he could give. Or more accurately, more than he was willing to keep giving. The doorbell rang again. David and Linda looked at each other, tension crackling between them. She stood first, but David motioned for her to stay. He walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. Mike, standing alone, hands shoved in his jacket pockets, head tilted slightly like he was trying to appear casual. David didn't open the door. Instead, he cracked the window beside it. "What do you want?" Mike leaned closer. "I just want to talk man to man." David almost laughed. Man to man. The same man who hadn't held a steady job in 5 years. The same man who stood by while Rachel manipulated their family over and over. "You need to leave," David said flatly. "Come on, David. Don't let this thing with the box blow up everything." It was a joke. Rachel was just trying to... "She sent a live animal to our home, Mike, on Father's Day. That's not a joke." Mike looked annoyed now. His attempt at diplomacy had ended as quickly as it began. "You don't get to just cut us off without talking to us." David's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly what I get to do." Mike stepped back, his expression twisting into something darker. "You're going to regret this." David didn't respond. He simply closed the window and locked it. When he returned to the living room, Linda's face was pale. "I saw who it was," she whispered. "What did he say?" "He said, 'I'll regret this,'" David replied. She sat down slowly, like someone afraid the floor might fall through. "David, I think we need legal protection." "I already contacted Margaret," he said. "We'll update the will, and we'll file a restraining order if it comes to that." Linda nodded. "What about Ethan and Chloe?" David exhaled. "We'll create a trust, something they can access for education. But not a cent will go through Rachel or Mike." The decision, once spoken aloud, felt final, heavy, but clean. Later that evening, Margaret called. She'd cleared a spot for them first thing Monday morning. David thanked her and hung up. He turned to Linda, who was already folding blankets and tidying the living room, as if physical order could restore emotional balance. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Rachel, not a message. A call. He let it ring. Linda looked at him. "Are you going to answer?" David picked up the phone. Let it ring one more time, then silenced it. "No," he said. "I've heard everything I need to." Outside, the sky was shifting into early dusk. Shadows stretched across the street. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then fell silent. In the quiet, David felt something shift inside him. Not grief, not yet, but resolve. The kind that builds when a line has been crossed too many times. He stood up, closed his office door behind him, and reopened his laptop. Tomorrow, he would make it official. Monday morning arrived with a strange calm. David had barely slept, but not from anxiety. The decision had settled over him like a weighted blanket. Heavy, yes, but secure. For the first time in years, he wasn't worrying about how to bail someone out, or whether his daughter would show up with another sob story masked as an emergency. He dressed in silence. A navy polo, khakis, clean-shaven. Not out of habit, but because today felt like it deserved formality. Linda moved quietly through the house as well. Her eyes met his briefly over breakfast, and though no words were spoken, the message was clear. We're doing this. Margaret Summers' office was located on the third floor of a quiet professional building at the edge of town. David had been there several times over the years, for estate planning, refinancing the house, setting up college funds for the grandkids. But this visit was different. He wasn't here to plan for the future. He was here to sever ties with the past. Margaret greeted them warmly, but her tone shifted once they were seated and the door was closed. "You said this was urgent, David. Tell me everything." He did. In detail, the inheritance argument, the financial abuse, the delivery, the snake, the message, the unexpected visit from Mike. Linda occasionally added context, her voice steady but laced with sadness. Margaret's pen moved quickly across a yellow legal pad. Her brows furrowed deeper with each passing sentence. "This goes far beyond family tension," she said finally. "You're describing sustained harassment and intimidation, potentially even criminal behavior. The animal delivery alone. That's serious," David nodded. "We're done enabling. I want everything changed. No excess, no loopholes. And I want legal protection." Margaret looked at him squarely. "I can help you with all of it." She pulled up their existing estate plan and began outlining adjustments. Rachel would be removed from the will. A new trust would be created for Ethan and Chloe, educational only, tightly managed by an independent trustee, with zero access for their parents. Linda's eyes misted at the mention of the grandkids, but she nodded in agreement. Next came the legal protection. Margaret outlined the restraining order process, explaining what evidence would be most compelling. David had all of it: texts, call logs, the delivery confirmation, police and animal control records. Margaret's confidence was reassuring. They weren't being paranoid. They were being prudent. By the time they left, the paperwork was underway. David felt lighter than he had in months. That afternoon, back at the house, Linda retreated into the garden to pull weeds and water her basil. She did that when she needed to think. David, meanwhile, gathered every document he could find that tied him financially to Rachel. Bank statements, credit card authorizations, auto payments. He made a checklist, crossing off each line as he cut the cord. No more gym membership. No more insurance premiums. No more quiet $500 transfers to get them through the month. He remembered the first time he had sent her money. It had been for textbooks her freshman year of college. She had cried on the phone, overwhelmed with gratitude. That memory hurt now, not because it was a lie, but because it wasn't. Not back then. She had changed. Or perhaps the parts of her that would one day send a snake in a box had always been there, just hidden behind youthful vulnerability. A car drove past the house, slowing slightly near their mailbox. David watched it from the window, hand instinctively tightening around his phone. But it wasn't Rachel. Not yet. Linda came inside just as the phone rang. Another unknown number. David let it ring out. Then it rang again. Same number. Finally, he answered. "This is David." There was silence on the other end. Then Rachel's voice, cold and sharp. "Did you really go to a lawyer?" David said nothing. She continued. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." It was a joke. Mike didn't even want to send it. It was my idea. But it was harmless. "And now you're rewriting your will? Cutting me off?" David kept his tone calm. "It stopped being a joke the moment you made it clear it was revenge. And yes, I'm changing the will. You're punishing me for one mistake." "One mistake?" David repeated slowly. "Rachel, this is a pattern." "A long one." She went quiet again. Then, with venom in her voice, she said, "You'll never see Ethan and Chloe again." David expected the threat. What surprised him was how little it hurt this time. "I'm not going to be blackmailed anymore. Not with money, not with access to the kids. You've used those threats too many times." He ended the call. Linda walked over, having heard the tone of the conversation, but not the content. Was that her? David nodded. She made her position clear. Later that evening, they sat on the back porch, watching the sun dip below the trees. Linda poured wine for both of them, something they rarely did. David clinked his glass against hers and stared at the sky for a while. "She'll come here," Linda said. "I know. Soon. I'm ready." The next day brought confirmation that the legal documents had been filed. The will changes were official. The trust was set up, and the restraining order paperwork had been submitted with full documentation. Everything was in motion. And then, around 10:17 a.m., a black sedan screeched into the driveway. Linda looked up from the sink. David stood from the kitchen table. The doorbell rang. Then again. Then came the pounding. Rachel was here. The pounding on the front door echoed through the house like a drumbeat of war. Linda stood frozen near the hallway, her hands clenched tightly around a dish towel. David moved slowly, deliberately toward the entrance. He didn't rush. He didn't flinch. He had expected this. When he opened the door, Rachel stood on the porch, her posture stiff, her face flushed with anger. Behind her, Mike leaned against the car with crossed arms, feigning indifference, but his eyes were sharp and watching. Rachel didn't wait for an invitation. "You changed the will," she said, voice taut. "You cut me off." David didn't respond immediately. He took in the sight of her once polished appearance now slightly frayed at the edges. The desperation wasn't just in her voice. It clung to her like a scent. She had driven over without planning, without makeup, without her usual poise. "You should leave," David said calmly. "This isn't a conversation I'm having on my porch. You think you can just erase me from your life?" Rachel's voice rose. "After everything I've done for this family." Linda stepped in behind David now, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. Her presence gave him strength. Rachel's eyes flicked toward her mother, and for a moment, something flickered in her face. Guilt, maybe, or just the memory of who they all used to be. David stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind him, not to confront, but to contain the conversation. "You didn't come here to talk," he said. "You came here to intimidate. You think a surprise visit will make me panic? It won't." Mike pushed off the car and approached. "You really think you're going to sleep easy after cutting off your own daughter?" David turned his full attention to Mike now. "I've enabled Rachel for years. I paid your rent, your insurance, even your credit card bills. And you've both used my grandchildren as weapons when I refused to do more. That ends now." Rachel's eyes burned. "You think this makes you strong? It makes you cruel. You're leaving your own blood out in the cold. I'm protecting myself and your mother from further harm. That's not cruelty. That's survival." "You'll regret this," Rachel spat. "When you're old and sick and need someone to care for you, remember that you turned your back on your family." "No," David replied, voice low but firm. "I'm finally holding my family accountable." Rachel's fury cracked, replaced by something more desperate. "You're choosing money over love." "No," David said again. "I'm choosing peace over chaos." The standoff lingered. Then Rachel turned sharply and stormed toward the car. Mike followed, but not before stepping close to David one last time. "You think this is the end?" "It's not," he said, low and threatening. David didn't blink. "Then I'll see you in court." The car peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching as it turned sharply down the street. David stood there for several long moments after they were gone, breathing deeply, centering himself. When he turned to go back inside, Linda opened the door before he could reach for it. Inside, the house was quiet again. But this time the silence didn't feel uneasy. It felt earned. They spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the trust documents once more. Margaret had done her job well. The new trust ensured Ethan and Chloe would have access to educational support, tuition, books, verified school expenses. But nothing could be filtered through Rachel or Mike. The funds were held by an external trustee who would not budge under pressure or manipulation. Linda took comfort in that. "At least we can still do right by the kids," she said quietly, flipping through the pages. David nodded. "They deserve a chance, even if their parents don't." That night David couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, the family photo album open in front of him. Pictures of birthday parties, school plays, vacations. Rachel as a girl, holding hands with Linda at a pumpkin patch. Rachel with her diploma, with Ethan as a newborn, with Chloe on her first tricycle. What had changed? He tried to pinpoint the moment things shifted. Maybe there wasn't just one. Maybe it was the slow erosion of gratitude into entitlement. Love into leverage. A soft knock came at the door. Linda stepped in, robe wrapped tightly around her. "She's going to come at us harder," she said. "I know. She's lost her last lifeline. That makes her dangerous." David looked up at her. "We have the law on our side now. We have boundaries." Linda sat beside him and looked at the photo album too. "Do you think she even sees what she's become?" "No," he said, "and I don't think she wants to." The next day, Margaret called. The restraining order had been granted. Delivery was scheduled. Rachel and Mike would receive it before the end of the week. "That will give you legal protection if they try to contact you again," Margaret explained. "Any violation becomes a criminal matter." David thanked her. As he hung up the phone, he allowed himself a moment to feel something unfamiliar. Relief. For decades, he had been the net catching Rachel every time she fell. But every rescue had taught her that there were no consequences. Now, for the first time, there would be. But as night fell again and the house grew still, another thought crept into David's mind. Rachel wasn't going to disappear quietly. She was going to escalate. And even with the law on their side, he knew what was coming next. She wasn't done. The restraining order was served on a Thursday afternoon. Margaret confirmed it via email. Rachel and Mike had both accepted the legal notice in person. It was now official. Any further contact, physical or digital, would be grounds for criminal charges. David read the email twice, not because he didn't understand it, but because he wanted to feel the full weight of what it meant. For 34 years, he had been Rachel's safety net. Now the net had been cut. She was on her own, and she would have to live with the consequences of her own decisions. But David knew her well enough to understand something else, too. She would not go quietly. That evening, he and Linda sat in the living room, lights dimmed, a gentle breeze drifting through the cracked windows. The mood was subdued but steady. Linda sipped her tea slowly while David sorted through unopened mail. Bills, catalogs, the usual clutter. He tossed most of it aside until his fingers brushed over something different. A plain white envelope with no return address. His pulse quickened. "Linda," he said quietly. She looked up from her cup. He handed her the envelope. She held it delicately, almost like it might burn her fingertips. David retrieved a letter opener from the side table and carefully slit the top. Inside, a single sheet of paper folded once, typed, neat, clinical. It read, "You've made your decision. So have we. You'll regret this." When Chloe asks why she doesn't know her grandparents remember today, there was no signature, no direct threat, just an implication. Cold, calculated, cruel. David folded the letter and placed it on the coffee table. "It's starting," he said. Linda didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. Rachel was testing the boundary. She hadn't broken the restraining order yet, but this was a message. A warning. A preview. David sat in silence for several minutes, then retrieved a notepad from his desk. He began documenting everything, The time the letter arrived, the envelope description, the exact wording. Every small detail. They were building a new kind of case now. By Friday morning, another text came through, this time from an unknown number again. We're not done. You think the law will protect you, but it won't keep you warm in a nursing home. David saved the message, took screenshots, forwarded everything to Margaret. She replied quickly, reassuring him that these communications strengthened their legal position. If Rachel or Mike tried anything more, even veiled, it would be used against them. Saturday brought a new kind of disruption. David and Linda were returning from the grocery store when they noticed something strange. Their front door wreath had been torn down. The welcome mat was soaked in what looked like coffee or soda, and the mailbox hung crooked on its post, bent unnaturally. David scanned the street. No sign of Rachel's car, no cameras nearby. Just a quiet, sunny neighborhood pretending nothing had happened. Inside, nothing was touched. The alarm hadn't been triggered. But the message was clear: they had been here, or someone acting on their behalf. Linda sat down on the edge of the couch and buried her face in her hands. David didn't speak. He went back outside with his phone and took photos of everything. The wreath, the mat, the mailbox. Then he filed a police report, citing the ongoing legal order. He knew Rachel would deny everything. She'd claim it wasn't her. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was Mike or someone else. But it didn't matter. The escalation was real. That evening, they double-checked the locks, closed the blinds, turned on all the outside lights. After dinner, David pulled out the photo album again. He didn't know why. Maybe to remind himself of what once was. Maybe to mourn it properly. He flipped through the pages of birthdays, holidays, school concerts. There was Rachel with her 8th grade science fair trophy. Rachel holding Ethan for the first time in the hospital. Rachel laughing with Linda during a beach trip when Chloe was just a toddler. Those people felt like strangers now. David spoke, almost to himself. Do you think she even misses who she used to be? Linda was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I think she misses what she used to get. It was a brutal answer, but an honest one. The next morning brought one final straw, a package. Again, identical in size and weight to the one from Father's Day. No return address. No markings. Linda stood back, arms crossed over her chest, eyes brimming with fear. David didn't touch it. He called the police immediately. When they arrived, they followed protocol, secured the package, photographed it, logged the delivery time. The officer turned to David. It's the same as before. Could be another animal. Could be nothing. Either way, we'll get it analyzed. David nodded. Thank you. After they left, he sat on the porch with Linda. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Eventually, David whispered, this is her way of saying she's still in control. Linda didn't respond right away. Then she said, not anymore. They went inside and closed the door behind them. That night, the house was locked tight. Lights on timers, curtains drawn, and David once again opened his laptop. He began drafting a second letter to Margaret. This time he wasn't just asking for protection. He wanted full legal recourse, criminal charges. If Rachel or Mike crossed the line again, they wouldn't just face family disappointment. They would face the law, because some lines, once crossed, do not get redrawn. The air inside the Walker home grew heavier with each passing day. Though the doors were locked and the legal protections were in place, the tension lingered, an invisible fog that refused to lift. David moved through the house with a quiet deliberation, checking windows, reviewing security camera footage, and documenting everything in a growing folder labeled Incidents. The second package had turned out to be empty. No animal, no device, just shredded paper and an empty container with punctured holes, clearly meant to intimidate, not harm. But intimidation was harm in its own way, and David knew that Rachel was carefully walking the line. Close enough to threaten, far enough to deny, Margaret's response was swift. The updated letter she drafted to the county court detailed the escalation. She submitted an addendum to the restraining order, requesting an extension and criminal investigation. David read the document twice, appreciating her precision. Each detail of Rachel's behavior was accounted for. Dates, times, threats, texts, packages, even the damaged mailbox. Still, the emotional toll was growing. Linda had become quieter. She spent more time tending the garden, though she pulled the curtains at every sound from the street. Her sleep was fitful, David heard her stirring most nights, walking the hallway, sometimes just standing at the window, watching nothing in particular. Sunday brought a break in the routine. The doorbell rang at noon. David looked through the peephole and saw a man he didn't recognize, middle-aged, polo shirt, clipboard in hand. David opened the door but kept the screen locked. Yes? Mr. Walker, I'm from Children's Services. Do you have a moment? David's stomach dropped. Children's Services? Yes, sir. We received an anonymous report that your home may not be a safe environment for visiting grandchildren. I'm just here to follow up. David blinked, stunned. My grandchildren haven't been to this house in over a year. The man nodded. Yes, that was noted in the file. The report said you were making threatening statements toward their mother and potentially planning to kidnap the children during an upcoming visit. David's face went pale. That's completely false. I understand. I'm not here to accuse, just to document. I do need to verify some information and ask a few questions. David stood in the doorway for a long moment, then stepped out and closed the door behind him. My wife is inside. She doesn't need to hear this, he said. The man nodded, professional and polite, asking basic questions. David answered everyone. No, the children hadn't visited. No, there was no upcoming visit planned. Yes, they were estranged from Rachel and Mike. Yes, there was a restraining order in place. David even showed him the copy, along with the police reports and Margaret's documentation. The man from Children's Services wrote everything down, thanked him for his time, and left with a quiet reassurance that it was likely just a false report. David watched the car disappear down the street before re-entering the house. Linda was at the top of the stairs, her face unreadable. What was that about? She asked. He hesitated. Rachel filed a complaint. Said we were a threat to the kids. Linda didn't react immediately. Then she exhaled, long and slow, like she'd been punched in the gut. Why is she doing this? Because she's losing control, David said. And this is what control looks like when it turns to desperation. That evening, David sat at his desk again, fingers steepled under his chin. He had tried everything: kindness, financial support, emotional appeals, legal boundaries. Rachel had crossed every line, and now she was weaponizing systems meant to protect children in order to punish her parents. It was evil, plain and simple. He opened a new document. This one wasn't for the lawyer. It was for the court. A personal statement. If Rachel wanted to escalate this into an official war, he would answer with truth and documentation. He wrote for over an hour, outlining every sacrifice made for her, from her first apartment to the car he co-signed, the tuition, the loan payoffs, the clothes, the gifts, the emergency transfers labeled as love. He chronicled the emotional blackmail, the tantrums, the ultimatums. He listed the manipulation surrounding Ethan and Chloe, the threats to cut off access, the gaslighting, the guilt. He ended the letter with a single sentence. We did not abandon our daughter. She abandoned us when she made cruelty her currency. The next morning, the Walker house received a voicemail from Rachel's number. David didn't answer, but the message came through. You think you've won. But I'm not done. I'll find a way to make you pay. You owe me. You owe your grandchildren. If you think the courts are going to protect you forever, you're wrong. David saved the message and added it to the file. By that afternoon, Margaret had already filed for additional protective orders and submitted all new evidence to the court. Her response was calm but razor sharp. You're not dealing with family anymore, she told David over the phone. You're dealing with a hostile actor, and we'll treat her accordingly. Linda spent most of the day in the kitchen baking. She did that when she was trying to process pain. The smell of cinnamon and apples filled the house. It was comforting and heartbreaking at once. David helped her clean up afterward. As he dried the last dish, Linda spoke without looking at him. Do you still think there's any way back from this? He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, not for us. Maybe for the kids, one day, but not for us. That night they sat on the couch watching old home movies. Linda had digitized their tapes years ago, and David pulled up a video of Rachel's 10th birthday. She was laughing, blindfolded, swinging at a piñata, surrounded by friends and balloons. Mike wasn't in the picture yet. Neither were the manipulations, the threats, the darkness. Linda touched his hand lightly. She was happy once, I know, David said, but happiness and goodness were not the same, and sometimes the path from one to the other got lost in entitlement. buried under years of unchecked selfishness. The doorbell rang again. This time, it wasn't Rachel. It was someone else. David opened the door to find Officer Mason standing on the porch. He recognized the young officer from the earlier animal control visit. His uniform was crisp, expression serious, but his eyes held a flicker of something gentler, pity, maybe, or concern. "Mr. Walker," he said with a nod. "May I come in for a moment?" David stepped aside, motioning toward the living room. Linda appeared from the hallway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, brows knit with worry. The presence of law enforcement no longer startled her. It simply confirmed what they already knew. Rachel was still pushing. Officer Mason waited until they were seated before pulling a small notepad from his jacket. "I wanted to follow up on a report we received this morning," he began. "It's related to the restraining order and your daughter's recent behavior." David exchanged a look with Linda. "What happened?" Mason hesitated. "Rachel attempted to file a counter-complaint against you, claiming elder abuse and financial manipulation." Linda's hand shot to her mouth. David leaned forward, his voice low. "What exactly did she say?" "She claimed that you and your wife cut her off financially as punishment for not agreeing to give you custody of the grandchildren. She alleges that you're retaliating, spreading falsehoods to friends and authorities, and that you're using the legal system to harass her." David let out a bitter exhale. "Unbelievable." "Fortunately," Mason continued, "she didn't provide any evidence. And frankly, your paper trail is clean. The courts have a full record of financial support, documentation of threats, and a timeline that supports your case. But I wanted to let you know personally, this likely won't be her last attempt." Linda spoke now, her voice quieter than usual. "Is there anything else we can do? She's attacking from every angle. We're just trying to live our lives." Mason nodded. "You're already doing everything right. Keep documenting. Keep reporting. Don't engage her. The more she lashes out, the more the system will work in your favor. But I won't lie to you. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better." David stood and shook his hand. "Thank you, officer." After Mason left, Linda dropped into the armchair with a sigh. "She's going to destroy herself with this." "She already is," David replied. He returned to his office, updating the incident log, printing new copies of the voicemail transcription, and compiling screenshots of Rachel's social media posts. She had begun posting vague references, cryptic stories about being betrayed by family and having to fight for justice. The comments were filled with friends expressing sympathy, completely unaware of the full truth. David didn't respond publicly. He didn't comment, didn't react, but each post went into the file. That evening he received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "An apology." It was from Rachel. He opened it cautiously. "Dad, I don't want this to go on forever. I never meant to scare you with the package. I thought it would be funny. Mike said it was too far, but I didn't listen. I miss the kids seeing their grandparents. I miss Mom. I just wanted help, and things got out of hand. Maybe we could talk. Just the three of us." Rachel David stared at the screen for a long time. It was exactly the kind of message he had hoped for 6 months ago. But now he felt nothing. There was no ownership, no admission of guilt, just deflection and spin. Mike, the same man who threatened him, was painted as the voice of reason. The word sorry was never used. The mention of the children was leverage, not longing. David printed the email and added it to the file. Then he closed his laptop. The next day, Margaret called with news. Rachel's counter-complaint had been dismissed. The court had reviewed the timeline and documents. Everything pointed to Rachel as the aggressor. The restraining order would stand, and her credibility with the court had taken a hit. David shared the news with Linda over breakfast. She didn't smile, just nodded slowly. "I don't think she realizes how far gone she is," Linda said. "She doesn't care," David replied. "Not about the truth, only about winning." That afternoon they received a delivery, this time from a courier service. A man in a blue jacket handed David a sealed envelope and asked for a signature. David opened it slowly inside. Legal documents. An official notice that Rachel and Mike were petitioning for access to the grandchildren, without visitation from the grandparents. David read the words twice. Rachel wasn't trying to reconcile. She was trying to erase them entirely. Linda read over his shoulder, then sat down without a word. She looked like something inside her had fractured. This is war, she whispered. David nodded. But it's the kind of war where we don't fight. We just document. And we let the truth win. The next morning, Margaret filed an official response. She included transcripts, call logs, the attempted counter-complaint, and all documentation of Rachel's harassment. She requested a judge to intervene and evaluate Rachel's fitness for parental influence. It was a long shot, but necessary. David realized something as he reread the legal language. He was no longer reacting. He was no longer on the defensive. For the first time in this ordeal, he was moving forward with clarity. He would not fight dirty. He would not manipulate. But he would protect what mattered, his wife, his peace, and the legacy of truth he had tried to pass down. Rachel could keep playing games. But the rules had changed. The courtroom was smaller than David expected, less dramatic than television made it seem. No grand gallery, no echoing acoustics, just a wood-paneled space that smelled faintly of ink and anxiety. Linda sat beside him, hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken much that morning, but her presence was grounding. Familiar, unshakable. They were not here for a trial. This was a preliminary hearing. A judge would decide whether Rachel and Mike's petition to restrict grandparent access had any legal merit, and whether their behavior warranted further scrutiny. Margaret arrived exactly on time, papers neatly stacked in a leather briefcase. She greeted them calmly, her tone businesslike but warm. "We've submitted everything," she whispered. "This judge is sharp. He'll see the pattern." Rachel and Mike entered next. They sat on the opposite side of the room, several feet away, but the tension crackled like static. Rachel wore a tailored blazer, her makeup flawless, hair pulled back into a tight bun. Mike looked less composed, nervous, twitchy, jaw clenched tight. Rachel didn't look at David or Linda once. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then the hearing began. Margaret presented first. She was methodical, calm, devastatingly thorough. She outlined a timeline of escalating behavior: financial dependence, manipulation, threats, emotional blackmail, and finally, criminal intimidation. She submitted recordings, text messages, photos of the packages, the police reports, and the restraining order. She included the attempt to weaponize Child Protective Services, the false elder abuse claim, and the email Rachel had sent when she realized her actions had gone too far. "Your Honor," Margaret concluded, "this is not a case of family tension. It is a case of systematic coercion and psychological harassment, escalated into legal territory. My clients have not only protected themselves appropriately, but have demonstrated remarkable restraint." Throughout, the judge nodded slowly and turned to Rachel's lawyer. The defense stuttered out a response, emotional, poorly supported. They claimed Rachel was under financial strain, that she was desperate to protect her children from emotional distress caused by David's cold behavior. But the judge interrupted them mid-sentence. "There's no documentation of abuse," he said, "and no evidence that Mr. Walker has made any attempt to disrupt the children's lives. On the contrary, I see overwhelming evidence of financial support and emotional investment." The room fell silent. Then the judge issued his ruling. Rachel's petition was dismissed with prejudice. Further, the court recommended an independent review of her fitness to manage educational decisions for Ethan and Chloe. The trust fund, Margaret confirmed later, would remain protected, untouched by Rachel or Mike. When the hearing ended, Rachel stood quickly collecting her things. She brushed past David and Linda without a word. Mike followed, but he cast one last look over his shoulder, a glare that tried to convey power. It didn't land. Outside the courtroom, David and Linda stood with Margaret, the sunlight spilling over the courthouse steps. For a long moment, they just breathed. "It's done," Linda said softly. "No," David replied. "But the storm has passed." That evening, back at home, the house felt different. Not lighter exactly, but resolved. There were no more threats to anticipate. No more documents to file. The war had been fought. The lines had been drawn. Now came the part no one talks about, the part after the battle, where the scars are counted and the rebuilding begins. David sat on the porch with a cup of coffee gone lukewarm. Linda joined him, blanket around her shoulders, eyes gazing at the quiet street. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We live," David said. A week passed. Then 2 no calls, no texts. No more packages, just peace. Margaret called to confirm that Rachel had not appealed. The review into her parental rights was underway. It could take months. In the meantime, the trust for Ethan and Chloe stood untouched, waiting for a future that didn't require manipulation to access. On the last Sunday in June, David received a letter. Not from Rachel. From Ethan. The handwriting was messy, the spelling imperfect. "Dear Grandpa, I miss you. Mommy doesn't let us visit, but I told her I want to. I hope you're okay. I like the dinosaur book you gave me. I still have it. Love, Ethan." David read the letter 3 times before showing it to Linda. Her eyes welled up. It wasn't over, not completely, but something had survived. A thread of hope. A reminder that even in a fractured family, there are still small hands reaching through the cracks. That night, David added one final page to his file. Not legal papers, not evidence, just Ethan's letter, placed gently on top. Because love, real love, isn't controlled by threats or money. It endures. And so, David Walker chose peace over obligation, truth over manipulation, and boundaries over guilt. His daughter tried to use fear, threats, and even the law against him. But in the end, it was her own cruelty that severed the last tie. Now, his legacy belongs not to those who demanded it, but to those who will one day earn it. If you were in David's shoes, would you have done the same? Or would you have given her one more chance? Let us know in the comments. If this story hit home, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true-style tales of justice, betrayal, and hard-won freedom. We post new stories daily, and your voice helps shape the next one.